Welcome, everyone. We'll get started now. My name is Jeff Farrar, and I wanted to welcome you to Ignition Community Live, episode 15. I'm the marketing manager at Grantek, and I will be the moderator of today's session. Grantek is a premier integrator and enterprise integrator with inductive automation, and we're happy to join our partner Opto22 as hosts for today's session. This episode of Ignition Community Live is titled The Quickest and Simplest Method for Getting Plant Floor Data into Ignition, Applications, Case Studies, and Live Demos. I'd like to introduce today's hosts, Benson Hougland of Opto22 and Doug Yerger of Grantek. And with that, I'll pass it on to Benson.
Okay, thanks, Jeff, and hello, everyone. You might be able to see some video there as well. I'm broadcasting live from Opto22 Studios here in Temecula, California. Very excited to work with Grantek and Doug on this demo of our Rio system communicating directly to Ignition, so getting sensor data directly into the Ignition platform. My name is Benson. I've been with Opto for 25 years, and Opto is a 46-year-old privately held industrial automation manufacturer, and we also develop software that runs on our hardware. We have an installed base in the hundreds of millions and in thousands of customers worldwide. We have a reputation in the industry for truly combining the notion of OT systems with their ruggedness and reliability with IT systems and their open source capabilities and capabilities for data sharing, and of course reducing friction between IT and OT. And you're going to get a first-hand look at that today. It's mostly live demos, so we're very excited to get started. Doug?
Hello, and I'm Doug Yerger. I'm a principal engineer at Grantek. I've been with Grantek a little over 11 years, but I've been doing automation since 1989 when I first learned to program my first PLC. Grantek specializes in, as you can see on the slide, we have food, beverage, CPG, pharmaceuticals, as well as many other industries, and we go from the plant floor through MES and ERP integrations.
Great. So on today's topic, again, very excited, mostly a live demo, a little bit of slides here and there. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to wire up two sensors, and let me just pop my video back in here so you guys can see a little bit of what that might look like. Got a couple sensors here that I'm going to wire up, and a stack light right over here. And we're going to wire up that to a Groove Rio, and then I'm going to configure that I/O, and then also set up MQTT with SparkPlug-B to send that information right over to the broker so that Doug can.
And then I'm gonna, over here in Pennsylvania, I'm gonna configure Ignition Maker Edition to reach out to that broker and pull in that data that Benson's publishing. We're gonna be able to see that live. And then once we complete that, I have a Rio here in Pennsylvania that I'm gonna show how you can configure Ignition via Modbus to communicate with it very quickly. One quick note before we move on is while I'm using Maker Edition today to show its full feature capabilities, you should remember that it is designed for non-commercial use and should not be used outside of those non-commercial enterprises.
Yeah, good point, Doug, but we're excited to see the Maker Edition in maybe one of its first live demos, so exciting for that. If we have time left, I'm not sure we will, but if we do, we'll also be able to show something else that's kind of cool. I'm going to pop up my demo cam here for you. And behind me here is a couple of other devices, including the Groove Epic, this device here that's actually running Ignition Edge, communicating to this Siemens and Allen Bradley PLC. And we can show that data also moving up to the broker, and Doug can look at that, or I can show it from my gateway. Again, that is time permitting, so we'll keep you posted on that. Okay, so what is Groove Rio? Well, I would imagine that a lot of folks on this ICL call are familiar with Ignition, but you may not be familiar with Rio. And Rio is basically an industrial Ethernet I/O module, and that is web browser configurable. And what's really cool about Rio is how many unique field combinations you can do with it. And the reason for that is because it's software configurable for each of the I/O channels. So you're going to get to see that live here in just a moment. It's ideal for monitoring, for acquiring data, obviously maybe some control of some standalone equipment or devices. But one of its real interesting things is that it doesn't require a PLC or a PC to get the data where it needs to go. We can actually publish the data directly from the I/O module itself. And this might be really effective for things like OEE, where you just need to get a couple status points from a machine and start moving it into software applications, or maybe even layering over an existing control system. So you don't want to mess with the PLC, you just want to parallel some IO points out of there and get that directly into infrastructure so other subscribers, software subscribers, can get access to that IO data. So when you think about Rio, we kind of say it's not your father's remote IO. This is, digital transformation applications, and what we've heard from a lot of people is this is ignition IO. So it's really a quick way, again, of getting that data into the system. So we're going to go right into demo time. Let's hit it hard. I'm going to go over to another screen here and move over, and hopefully you guys can see what I'm looking at. And this is my little demo panel here. So I'll try to keep focused on you guys, but also I've got a camera right above. And here I've got my stack light I described a moment ago. I've got my cool little door sensor here, and I've got an ICTD. An ICTD is an integrated temperature, integrated circuit temperature device. And what's cool about these guys is they're just little 2-wire temperature sensors, and they can go a distance of 2,000 feet. So that's kind of cool, and it'll become important when Doug talks about his application that he's working on coming up. Then I've got my Rio right here in the box. So here's your first unboxing video for Groov Rio. Let's take a look inside. First things first, we've got a nice little termination tool here in the bag. I've got my own sitting here on the desk, so I'll set that aside. Next thing I've got here is my terminal. So my terminal is a 26-pin terminal with a cage clamp design for the wiring. So we'll set that aside for a moment. Oh, one other thing that's kind of cool on there, single captive screw there for wiring that or holding that down into the Rio. Okay, let's pull this guy out, discard the box. There we go. And there's my Rio. You see a label on the side there. One of the things we want to get off of that label before I mount it onto my demo panel is the host name. You see, when I connect this to an Ethernet network, it'll go out and use DHCP services and obtain an IP address. It will then also register its DNS name, this default host name, into DNS on your computer network so that we can access the device by its name. So let's take a look. The default host name's right there. So I will go ahead and write this down for use in just a moment. 049 Charlie-66. Okay, terrific. That'll become important in a moment. All right, you can see there I've got a built-in DIN rail clip. We'll mount that guy right on there. All set. Now I'm going to take my terminal connector, and it only goes in one way. I'll go ahead and plug that in there. Perfect. And I'll grab my handy-dandy screwdriver, and we'll go ahead and screw that in. There. Nice and secure. Okay, terrific. Now we got to give this guy power, right? So I've got two little spade lugs down here at the bottom, and those are for 10 to 32 volts of DC power. But what fun is that? This thing is PoE powered. So I've got a switch back here in the back corner of my desk here, and that's a PoE switch. So I'll simply take a Cat5 cable, and I'll plug it into Ethernet 1, and we should see some LEDs start blinking, and indeed we do. So very cool. The device is starting to power up. So we're going to go now over to my other screen, and let me pull that up now and go into demo 2. All right, and turn that down. So here we are again, and I've got a browser window up. I've got my demo screens. I've got both myself and our demo table here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wire this guy up. So I'm going to wire my temperature sensor, my door sensor, and so on. Now, while this is booting up, I'm going to use my other Rio, which is right here on my desk, and this one's host name is Rio-Benson. So I'm going to go ahead and go over here and click up here onto my shortcut and log into that one. And the reason why is because I want to see what the wiring diagrams are. Now, I can go to our website and figure all that out, but I think it's funner and more cool to actually see that the Rio itself does have all the wiring diagrams. So I'm going to click there, go to there, and there's the wire diagrams for all the sensor types that are supported by the Groov Rio. So I'm going to go to ICTD input here. And as you can see, there's the wiring diagram. Okay, so let's follow the instructions. In channel 0, I'm going to put my ICTD, and it says I should put the black wire into pin 1. So let's do that. There's the black wire. Stick it in there and release the tool, and we're done. The white wire should go into 2, so I'll push 2, stick them in there, and thank you, Ben, for putting those ferrules on there for me, making that a little bit simpler. Boom, I'm all done. My ICTD is now wired up. Let's go now to the door sensor. So the door sensor is just a dry contact. But what's cool is Rio will actually provide the excitation voltage, the wetting voltage for this dry contact. So let's go back and take a look at the wiring diagram for that. There we go, switch powered input. We're gonna go to channel 1. So in one of my leads here, I'm gonna put into number 4. So I'll do that and stick it in there. And the second one will go into number 5. And we'll do that. So for all you instrumentation techs that may be on the call right now, hopefully I'm doing this satisfactorily. And then there's the other end of my my sensor. We'll configure that IO in just a moment. Okay, last one is my stack light. Now my stack light is a digital output and it needs 24 volts to work. So thankfully I've got 24 volts here to my little terminal strip, and I'm gonna bring those 2 wires into the Rio as well. So let's take a quick look at how that's wired up. We'll go discrete syncing output. We're gonna go into channel 2 here, and as you can see, I'm gonna get my power lead and put that into number 7. So I'll take my power lead and we're gonna drop that into pin number 7. Push down my tool, stick in my power lead, boom. And the return is going to go into channel 8. So grab my return here, push into 8, and voila, all set. Nice little tug here, make sure I'm all set. I'm in good shape. Now we get to configure the IO. Now to do that, obviously I don't want to do it on Rio Benson, that's this device over here. We're gonna now log on to this guy because he's clearly booted up. So we're gonna take off this part here, and we're actually gonna log into the host name I just typed in. So opto-04- oh, looks like it's there. Thankfully, I've probably done this before. I'm going to hit enter, and of course it says the connection is not private, and that of course is true. I just pulled it out of the box. There's no security, no certificate set up. I'll just click advanced and get past the warning, and let's see if we can. There we go. Now, when you first fire up Rio, it's going to recognize it hasn't been commissioned yet, so it automatically goes to the commissioning page. And the reason for that is because, one, we want to know, what its IP address it got, for example, but it also means that I have to set up an account. You see, Rios don't have, and nor do Groov Epics, have a default username and password. No device on the plant floor should. So when you first boot it up, you have to create that account. So to do so, we're gonna go, let's get started. But before I move on, real quickly, you can see there the IP address that I did obtain from the DHCP server. So I can write that down. I'll just write that down real quick. And that's just to have it as documentation should for some reason DNS doesn't resolve properly or whatever, kind of a backup. But I really don't need to access the IP address from here forward as long as my network services are running. Okay, so here I'm going to type in my username and password, and it should be noted here that when you do this, this is the admin account for this device. And if you happen to lose these credentials, we can't help you. This is just like any system, you're going to set it up, you'll need to remember it. We do, the one nice thing about the terminal tool though, is it does fit into the reset to defaults pin. So that's the only way out if you lose your credentials. No worries, we're going to go ahead and create the account. And as soon as we do, obviously we have to log into that account. So we're going to do that now. I'm going to type in live, and hopefully I got it right. Good, I don't have to reset to defaults. So here I am now onto this Rio, and as you can see, it's a web server. It has all the pages. Everything I need to configure this device is literally on the device. So all my wiring diagrams, all my documentation, everything is there. Now, one of the things about Rio and most of our products is we'll actually do temperature conversion for you on the device. You just have to let us know which one we want. So I'm going to go into IO config here, and I'm going to select temperature unit is Celsius from the factory. I'm going to do this in Fahrenheit, and there we go. I'll click save, and all set. Let's get to the IO. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here, accounts, security, all kinds of stuff. We don't have time to go through that in this particular ICL, maybe another one. Okay, so here we go. Channel 0, let's start off with configuring this device. We're gonna come in here and give it a name. In this case, I'm gonna call it Studio Temp. There we go. Now, what I've just done is given that particular ICTD a name, the single source of truth. At this moment that I type this and hit save, that will become the tag name throughout the entire system. Whatever software needs to get to that data, it will always be that tag name. Pretty cool. But here's where the magic happens. Channel type. This is where I give the channel 0 the personality of an ICTD. And look at all my options here. Tons of them. But what we care about right now is ICTD, so let me go to that, and it fills in all this information for me. Now the next step is, what data do I want to publish to the MQTT broker so that Doug in Pennsylvania can retrieve or subscribe to that data and build his application? So I come down here to public access. I'm going to select the read because naturally I want to send the value as a read point. It's a temperature input, but I can also change the deadband. Now, if you know MQTT, you know that it reports on exception. Only when values change do we publish that data. Now, as a temperature, it's going to float around quite a bit, so we may get a lot of traffic. You know, I don't think I need it to be at that resolution, so I'm going to actually put a deadband in here of a ½ degree. That means that when it changes outside of a ½ degree, then it publishes its data. Now, I'm also going to click min and max. And this is kind of cool because Rio will keep track of the min and max values of any analog input automatically for you anytime it's powered up. So I want to send those values over to Doug as well. And then lastly, I'm going to hit writable. Now, why would you write on a digital analog input or a temperature? Well, because maybe Doug wants to be able to reset that min and max after each day. So he wants to know over a given day what the min and max were, then his application can rewrite that back. Click save. All set. My first one's done. There's my temperatures. I'll go ahead and clear my maximum here, and we'll just test it out. I'll give it 78. It's a little warm in here. I thought it was just me. Okay, so we'll give that guy a little warm up there, and there we go. He's starting to go up, and that's in good shape. All right, let's go on to channel 2. Got to move quickly here. Let's go to configure, and same thing. Single source of truth. This is a door sensor. I'll keep this one simple. I'll just call it a door. And this is where the magic happens again. Now, in this case, you might say, well, it's a digital input, but actually it's not. It's something a switch input powered digital input. This is where we'll provide that excitation voltage. And it should be noted that that excitation voltage actually is coming from the PoE power, which is kind of cool. All right, so one other thing about Rio, on channels 0 and 1, we will actually have some pretty advanced features for digital inputs. And that's indicated here by this feature button. I'm going to click it, and these are the features I can place on that digital input. So in this case, I'm going to make it a counter, so that every time the door opens, I will count it. And that's kind of cool, and I want to send that up to Doug as well. Now, I'll send it to the broker so Doug can subscribe to it. But you can see I can do a bunch of other things here. Again, something for another time. Let's go ahead and make sure that we send the state of the door up to the broker and the counter value. And we'll make it writable again. And the reason for writable again is to clear that counter, say after a given day, we want to reset it back to 0. We're going to save it. Now that I'm in here, I can test it. So I've got my two sides here. I'm going to put them together. Yeah, look at that. Already working. Perfect. So now I can test that my digital input is working, that I've indeed powered it correctly, and I'm all set there. All right, last one, the digital output. Now this is my stack light here. As I said, I have 24 volts. I need to go ahead and configure that. So I'll do so here. Once again, I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call this red stack light. Great. Let's go ahead and select what kind of module that is or what signal it is. And here it's a 5 to 30 volt DC digital output. Okay, perfect. Now, again, I want to know the state of it, but I really care about writing to it because I'm going to let Doug actually post on a topic, on a Sparkplug topic, which I will, the Rio, I should say, will subscribe to and make a change. So we'll actually see Doug control my stack light from Pennsylvania. Okay, I'll hit save. The beauty of this as well is I can toggle it on and off. There you can see my lights going on and off. So I've tested and commissioned my IO. I'm all set. Okay, last thing is, where are we going to send the data? And how are we going to send it? Under what topic namespace? But before I get there, what we're going to do is do this securely. We're actually going to set up an encrypted connection to the broker, a TLS connection. That's the beauty of MQTT, is I just can use SSL TLS as my security model for moving this data very securely. So this is an encrypted channel, so we're going to make sure there's no man-in-the-middle attacks. To do that, I have to get a security certificate from the person who put the broker together for me. Now, my broker is a Chariot broker from my friends at Cirrus Link Solutions. They provided us a Chariot broker. We're running it on AWS, just a small EC2 instance, a T2 micro, I mean, just a small little guy. And it's a very efficient broker. And in there, we've created a security certificate. So I need to put it here in the Rio. So beauty is that all those tools are built into the Rio to go and get my certificate. I'm going to get it off my hard drive, and I'm going to upload it to the device. So what happens here is that when I make that initial connection to the broker, I'm going to exchange those security certificate keys to ensure that, one, I'm talking to the right broker, and two, I'm going to create an encrypted tunnel that I'm going to move all of the data through. So very, very secure. And as you'll see later, security is a very important consideration for IIoT. Okay, now that that's loaded in there, last thing is just configure the MQTT. I'm going to click on the button that says that and click on configuration. This couldn't get any simpler. Watch. First things first, the beauty of MQTT Spark Plug B is that it defines a topic namespace. And this is how the tags will show up in the gateway from MQTT Engine, you'll see in a moment. So I'm going to go in here and I'm put in my group ID. So I'll be going to Opto 22. And then I want to put in an edge node ID. I'm going to call this Ignition Live. And then I can put in a primary host ID, which is important, but we're going to skip that for this demo. And then the last one is the device ID. So I come over here to device, any unique ID here. In this case, I'm just going to call it Ignition IO. And then I'm actually going to add one more thing. The Rio will actually historically queue up many records. And in this case, I'm going to put, let's put 3,600 records. So that's not time, that's not 3,600 seconds or anything like that. That's 3,600 publishes we're going to queue up in the event that we lose comms. So there we go, all set. So I've now created my MQTT topic namespace. Now I'm going to add a broker. Now the broker, of course, is where are we going to send the data to? So I told you we put this broker up on Amazon, and I have a domain name for that, and it's called chariot.groov.com. Now I'm going to talk to this guy securely. So I'm going to put in the secure port for MQTT, which is 8883. Then I'm going to put in a client ID that can be any number, just a random number. Now I've also got to log in. So I told you we're encrypted to the broker, but I also have to authenticate to the broker so I can see my ACLs or my access control lists and so on. So not just anybody can log into the broker and grab all your data. So I'm going to go with that username and password, select SSL, select the certificate I just uploaded, click OK, and save. And I'm done. That's it. Now I just want to start the service, so I'll do so. And what's happening now is the service is now collecting or cataloging all the data tags that we said we wanted to publish to the broker. It's issuing a birth certificate and sending all those tags up. Now, anybody who wants the data and has the access rights and the right account can go in there and pull that data directly into their applications. So with that, I'm actually going to move the presentation over to Doug in Pennsylvania. So that's all from Temecula. Let me see if I can do that here. And Doug, there it is.
And thank you, Benson. So now we have in our publish subscribe message, Benson's gone ahead and configured his side there to publish it up to the broker we have up in the cloud. So now on my side, I need to go ahead and configure subscription to that broker and that namespace. So I'm going to go ahead. We're going to start by logging into our gateway here. And if I could type a password, which would be much more successful. So we're going to go in. What I want to show you first is we're going to come in here. We're going to come down. We're going to look at our modules first. And what we want to see here is the only extra module we have installed is MQTT Engine. The other modules, the distributor, the transmission, and the recorder, we don't have those installed, so we're not even going to have a chance to use those. We only need the engine module to actually do a subscription and using those tags here in Ignition. Before I configure that, I want to go ahead and open up the designer. Under all providers, we're going to have our MQTT engine listed here. And I just want to show edge nodes right now. There's no elements under it. And I just want to keep an eye on that as we go through our configuration here, and you'll see how quickly that's going to go ahead and populate when we get to that point. So what we're going to need to do is go into our MQTT engine settings. Oh, under general, the first thing we're going to want to do, since we by default, for security reasons, it blocks the ability to write from your client. We want to go ahead and clear those so we can actually write to Benson's devices and see what's going on there. So we're going to go ahead and save these changes on this page. We're going to go ahead and go to servers. And before we configure our server, just like Benson did, we're going to have to upload a certificate so we can connect to that broker. As Benson did, as Benson had, I also have a copy of the certificate here on my side, and we're just going to call that the Opto 22 certificate, so it's a little easier to identify as we're configuring. Certificates loaded. We're going to come over here to settings. We're going to create our new server. We're going to go ahead and call this the Opto 22 Chariot server. The SSL, I'm just going to go ahead and pick it since we've used it before, but if you notice, it's the exact same IP URL that was used by Benson, sslchariot.groov.com, port 8883. The username we're going to use a different username than Benson did. But since we have the same access control list, we have access to the same access control list that he's published that data on, we'll be able to see this information. So now we're going to go ahead and choose our certificate. And we can just go ahead and publish. And if we watch over here, we already have an arrow here showing our devices. We go ahead and refresh this just to make sure we get that publication down here. We see there are Benson.
Should pop in a moment. We're doing it secure, so it takes just a moment longer for that to come in.
Refresh again. Hopefully it shows up here very quickly. As you do notice, we have everything that was listed in our ACL. We should get our birth certificate any second, and then we should see this populate.
And while we're waiting for that, indeed, you can see several other devices that are publishing on that same topic namespace under Opto 22 Group ID, including another MyRio Benson here. We've got a turbine back here, a turbine controller that's connected to the AB controllers. And what's interesting here is that in this case, Doug didn't have to enter in any tag names. They all just appeared in his new instance of the ignition maker. So we're just going to give that I've confirmed over here, Doug, that it is publishing through another gateway. So I know we're in good shape. It's just going to take a moment for it to for you to receive that birth certificate and start subscribing.
Okay. I did notice you had a capital I in your live. Hopefully that's not creating a problem with our access control list.
No, it's not. The access control list, just so you guys know, the way that works is that these topics, Opto 22 as the group ID, in this case, we see Rio Benson as the edge node ID, you can actually limit who has access to each of these under that. So Doug actually has access with his username and login to the group ID Opto 22 and demo centers. But over on my gateway, I'm seeing a lot of other devices because I'm logged in a little bit differently.
And we'll go ahead and we'll show you a few features here while we're waiting for that to populate through there. As you can see, all of our tags are actually, we're bringing in that device ID that he created when he created each channel. This is on the Benson, his Rio Benson, but you can see it created all those. And on our side, we didn't create any information at all. And if we actually open up this temperature value, you'll see it even brings over our units with it straight from the Rio. So no configuration on our side, and we have all that information that we want. We can see it just refreshed, and now we have our ignition live showing up. So if we come in here, we're going to go ahead and browse. If you notice, he had his group ID was node Opto 22, his node ID was ignition live, and his device ID was ignition IO. So we can expand ignition IO, Opto MMP, modules, channels, and then we can see those 3 tags that he created. We'll expand all of these. For some reason it refreshed again on me. Oh, modules, channels. We'll go ahead and expand these 3. And we can see the values on here. And then if Benson would grab his ICTD, we'll see these values change. Or if he moves his door switch, we'll see those change.
I'll do one better. I'll actually have brought up some video here for you guys to see. And here's my door sensor. So as I put that together, we should see that state go on, and it just incremented to 9. So I'm doing this in Temecula, and Doug's in Pennsylvania, and he's seeing that data just like that. So I'll go ahead and grab my temperature probe, and we'll hold that, and we should start seeing that temperature go up as it changes outside of the deadband. And then we'll also see our min and max values as they start to go up as well. So, but what's really cool is, can you control something on my end, Doug?
I will see if we have it configured correctly. So first, let's try the easy one. We'll go ahead and turn on a stack light.
There it goes. So in the video, you should see that my red stack light came on. Here's my hands, nothing behind the curtain.
So that's me changing the stack light from here. And then for the counter, if we decide, oh, we're going to set that back to 0. And now if he goes ahead and moves
I'll do that here.
counter, we'll see that going up and down.
There we go. So that was pretty quick. In about a half hour there, we were able to wire up sensors and get it into the ignition platform and describe every step along the way.
Correct. And so we have this, we've now published, and then I've subscribed. So we have this fully functional. But what if you don't want to use MQTT, whether in-house or using a cloud broker like we're using right now, and you want to use one of the more tried and true ones? Well, to do that, I have a Rio here in Pennsylvania. I will go ahead and log in mine just to show you the configuration that we have here. On my IO channels here, I have 2 thermocouples and then a temperature and humidity sensor that are analog inputs. So we basically have 4 analog inputs coming in here. So what we're going to do is if we look at our IO config, we're going to make sure, we're going to send it over Modbus. So we're going to just come in here and make sure it's enabled and it is set to big NDN, just standard checks on our configuration there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come in to our IO tools. And this is a great feature of the Rio. I can go look and say, I want to do an analog channel read here. And all this is doing is it's telling me what my addressing I need to use on Modbus is. The Rio is always module 0. We're going to look at channel 0. And we can see that's going to be Modbus unit 21 address 0. For channel 1, the value is going to be 32. 64, and then 96 for our channel 3. So we need those. This is all we're doing on our groov right now. That's all we wanted to do was see those numbers. Everything else is already enabled by default. So we're going to come back over to our ignition gateway, come down to our OPC device connections. We're going to create a new device, Modbus TCP. We're going to give it a name. This is going to be our Grantek Rio. Our host name, Grantek Rio 1. Same name that's up here. We have to use port 8502 as opposed to the default 502. just looking at what our advanced properties are, one thing we need to double check is that we are using zero-based addressing. So we're going to go ahead and turn that on. So we are using it zero-based addressing. Some versions of Ignition, this actually says one-based addressing. So you just want to get that setting to, so it equates to zero-based addressing for the Rio. We're going to go ahead and say create new device. We'll see it's going to connect. So now we've connected to our Rio device, but unfortunately, the Modbus protocol does not allow us to do a tag browse. So we can't see those tags directly. So what we're going to need to do is actually do a mapping for them. So we're going to do one manually, and then I'll go ahead and import the configuration. To create the mapping, you need to give it a prefix. It can be any prefix you want as long as it's not one of the reserved Modbus names such as HR. We're going to do these one at a time. So our start and end is going to be AI0 through AI0. So we're going to have just that one that we're creating. Since we're going to be doing 32-bit length on our floats, we need to do a step, and that's telling it to grab 2 at a time. We're going to give it our unit ID. Our address was 0. And then we need to come in here and say we're going to grab a holding address of float. We can, if we want, we can go ahead and hit save here. We can come over here, we'll refresh our browser, go to the OPC browser, come in, browse down through our devices. You can see our Grantek Rios here, unit 21, and we have AI0. We can go ahead and just drag that into our tags to start with, and we'll see we're going to have a value. To get the other ones, I'm going to go ahead and go to the mappings here. We're going to choose our file. This one will be in my downloads, this Modbus config file. We'll go ahead and import that. You can see it's channel 0 is going to 0, 1 is going to 32, 2 is going to 64, 3 is going to 96. That exact mapping that the Rio gave us itself to tell us to use. Go ahead and hit save. Come back in our designer, refresh our OPC browser. And now under unit 21, we're going to see all 4 of those tags. So we can go ahead and grab those other tags quickly. One thing to point out for MQTT over Modbus, sorry, I stuttered there a little bit as I was waiting for those to fill in. But what we're looking at here is, here we didn't get a good name. We know it's analog 0 on node 21, whereas in MQTT, it told us it was the studio temperature. And if you notice in here, we have no unit. The engineering units is blank. It's because nothing was published, because this isn't a subscribe publish. It's pulled. So I'm just reaching out to it and saying, please give me your values. So there's a lot more configuration on this where MQTT is publishing that information, and it's common across anyone who's using it. If you would have multiple people trying to read this Modbus information, you'd obviously be reconfiguring the same information over and over again. So
Nicely
that
done.
covers setting those back up. So I guess, Benson, I believe we'll go ahead and jump back to the presentation.
Yep. And we'll scream through that, but I can tell you that as a result of what I just saw, it seems like MQTT is quite a bit easier than Modbus. But hey, Modbus is still tried and true, as you said. So we'll scream through the rest of these slides. Doug, I think you want to talk a bit about this application that you're working on, and we got about 11 minutes left.
Yep, we'll run through this real quick. This is an application we're working with one of our customers with. It's an automatic storage and retrieval system. If you're not familiar with what those are, the yellow squares you're seeing here in this huge warehouse section are pallets, and the purple vertical things are cranes that automatically take the pallets and store them, and then of course retrieve them back based on the shipping orders. The issue this customer has is some of their products, not all of them, but a few of them are temperature sensitive. Currently, what they do is come June 1st, they just don't allow those pallets to be stored above about halfway in the vertical direction. And they keep that blocking in place until September, mid-September, I forget the exact date. So they decrease the efficiency of the system simply because they don't know what the environment is out there. So what we've proposed is we can put one, two, a handful of Rio devices here, and using something like that ICTD sensor that has that 2,000 foot range. So we can run temperature sensors vertically to get a idea of where that temperature is, as well as throughout the system, and get that information back. Now, a lot of people would go, well, we want that back into the control system. But what you got to remember is these cranes, there's an overarching management system that tells it, pick up a pallet from here and store it there. It doesn't know anything about the pallets, and to be honest, it doesn't care about them. That system that controls it all is ignition. So that temperature information, all we need it for is to make those decisions on where to store it. So it doesn't need to go through any PLC. Ignition is what needs it. We can pull that straight into ignition now using MQTT and eliminate all that setup and maintenance and programming on that PLC side and bring it straight into ignition. Applications for IIoT and using the Opto 22 Rio for that, remote monitoring, similar to what we've talked about there. Anywhere you want to get data out in the field, PoE, you plug it in, you can start getting some of that data in there. Energy efficiency, whether you have motion sensors, where you want to see turning off lights, where you want to see if there's activity, just seeing how the temperature is. And the list goes on different ways you can do it. Many, many applications. And then in the vertical markets, whether it's a data center, a warehouse, building automation, you can see there's a nice distribution here of individual markets that almost have all equal shares here of who's interested in where they want this distributed information from. Well, they say oil, gas, automotive, life sciences, these top three individual ones. The one thing to remember is those are all using control system. Everything here is a control systems thing, but a lot of them don't need to be used for control. They're simply for monitoring and recording. So we can pull that out of the PLC and bring it straight into ignition and your historians.
Right. I think it also speaks to, Doug, that the fact that you don't necessarily always need a PLC now just to get some instrumentation data into software. Now there's other ways of doing that with these, more, let's say, smart Ethernet I/O type modules. But that's just, not to say that there aren't challenges that still exist. Obviously, this is some research that was done on the top IIoT challenges. Securing the data continues to be one of the most primary issues that people are trying to overcome. I think we've demonstrated how we can secure that data from the source of the sensor all the way through encrypted and authenticated to the software that needs to use it. And then in terms of integrating the data, I think, again, we've already clearly demonstrated that once we get into the ignition platform, and we did that quite simply, integrating it with anything else, whether it's cloud services, local databases, HMIs, all of that is supported very easily with the ignition platform. So, clearly what we're trying to do, both the inductive automation with Grantek and Opto 22's groov Rio, is make that as simple as possible while at the same time overcoming these challenges. We did have a question in the question pane about contact information. Thankfully, I put this slide together quickly. So if you have some questions about groov Rio and Opto 22, we welcome you to send us an email. We have engineers who are standing by. We've got, obviously, ones on the call here, or live chat on our website that is manned by engineers, not by, well, let's just say we got well-qualified people that are responding to the chats on our website. And for ignition questions in Grantek, obviously that's the email address you would use for them. And then again, they would be able to get back to you with any questions there. So we want to make sure we're getting some questions. It looks like some of them are coming in. And real quickly, I think one of the things I promised I might be able to show you is this guy here, which is the demo behind me. And I'm actually going to pull up, I'm going to pull that up here and into a smaller screen. And there you go. So now you can see the demo behind me and the demo that I was doing with Groove Rio. And of course, all of that data is coming into the broker, and we're able to access that from Philadelphia. Also can access it right from here. But what I'm showing you right now is actually this epic here is running Ignition itself. So instead of running Ignition like Maker Edition on Doug's PC in Pennsylvania, this Groove Epic can actually run an edition of Ignition called Ignition Edge. And the reason you might do that is if you have existing PLCs in the field and you don't necessarily want to parallel the I/O, you can use the Ignition software that's built in onto a product like Groove Epic. There are others as well, part of the onboard program. But I'll just quickly come over here to configure on my screen for Ignition Edge, come down to devices. And just like Doug did, he connected a Modbus device, but I've got my Allen Bradley driver and my Siemens driver, and they're connected. And that was pretty straightforward. And then if I look at my gateway that's located here in the building, I can see those same tags, the same ones that Doug saw, but I can see them here on my local gateway. But one thing you may notice is that I'm getting a lot more, a couple more edge nodes in there that Doug couldn't see. And that's because I'm logged in with a certain username and password that gives me access to tags across the entire system, where Doug's login only gave him access to the group IDs, demo centers, and Opto 22. So just another way of making sure only the right people get the right data. So with that, I think I do want to turn it back over to Ben to see if we have any questions that you want to bring up, or anything you saw interesting there.
Thank you, Benson. Awesome demo, you guys. There is a couple of questions here that I would like to touch on that I think are worthy of a mention. Does Opto 22 perform closed loop control based on a feedback signal? Yes, there are 4 PID loops built into the Rio. So you can configure those 4 PID loops to look at an analog input and control an analog output for sure. Benson, I'll let you talk to this one. This one's fantastic. Do we need different modules for the different sensor signals, like 4 to 20, 0 to 10, or thermocouple? And of course, the answer is no. That's the beauty of Rio, is all those configuration options are around 60,000 permutations.
Yeah, indeed, you're right, Ben. From one single module, we can software configure any of these channels for those various points that I did through the web browser. So there is only one part number, and you only have to stock one. So imagine how many spares you can eliminate with this type of configuration. So it can be different for, like Doug's using thermocouples and a humidity sensor. I happen to be ICTD, door sensor, but we're using the exact same product.
Right. Another really good feature that we haven't mentioned on the Rio is it does actually have a USB port, and the USB port can be used for memory sticks, USB memory sticks, Wi-Fi adapters, and of course also, interestingly, you can configure a USB to serial adapter, and then Node-RED can run on the Rio and can actually read Modbus RTU data through that serial adapter.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that adapter is useful for USB mass storage as well for data logging. But obviously, you want to move that data up in the Ignition platform and let it do your historian. And a shout out to the folks at Canary Labs. They also support MQTT Sparkplug B and can connect directly to the broker and pull in I/O data directly into their historian as well. So there's more and more software companies that are offering MQTT Sparkplug B and MQTT in their software to do something with the data, and of course, Canary Labs is there. If you would like to see a personal version of this demonstration, use that email address I provided earlier, and all of our engineers are prepared to offer a live demonstration setting all this up for you personally. So just give us a ring. That's why this studio is here, is so we can show you how it's done.
There's a couple of ones there about does Rio support the Sparkplug primary host ID? Actually, Benson, we'd have a minute. Why don't you talk to that primary host ID?
Yeah, you bet. So let me come over here to demo 2 here. And when you set up your gateway, you can also set up a primary host ID. So when, let me come back to here and actually go to the gateway we have running here at Opto 22. And when you set up the primary host ID, what it simply means is that when the Rio device is queuing up its data, it's essentially, let me put this camera in so you guys can see me. When we're queuing up the data, we want to make sure, one of the reasons why we might queue data is because our primary host, which is in this case would be Doug's Ignition Maker instance running at his in Pennsylvania. If that host went offline, we're going to still queue up. So whether it's the broker that goes offline or the primary host, we'll start queuing the data, waiting for the primary host to come back up. And that's I don't know all the details. That's a great question for Wes or Arlen or anybody at SiriusLink, but in short, it confirms that the historical data goes to the correct primary host who may be doing the tag historizing and so on. So yeah, good question. Any closing thoughts there, Doug, from your end, from a Grantek system integrator perspective?
No, I'm very looking forward to using MQTT in the future. It's a great protocol. I think we're going to see it start really taking over for some of those applications, especially that remote IO where having to build a panel and put a remote rack and getting power out there, and in some communications protocol and doing all that, where now we can get PoE, which is probably in that area already, get PoE out there and get that data back in very quickly, very easily, and very securely.
Sweet. Okay, and I saw another question come up, and I want to make a point of this. This is rather important. One of the questions we get a lot is like, well, what kind of IT involvement do I need to put together to say allow Doug from Pennsylvania to actually write to an output here? The answer is zero. You see, when I got on the network with my Groov Rio and I got a DHCP address, that means I also got a gateway. And if the network is properly configured, you're going to have a gateway to the internet. And that's the same as your PC. You get an IP address, you get a gateway, so you can go to google.com. Same idea here. It's all outbound. So I actually initiate the connection to the broker to send and publish all that data, and I keep that connection live, and that's my state. So I always know the state of my Rio from Doug's end. If I unplug my Rio right now, it's going to pop up in his ignition gateway or in the designer as offline. And that's because when the Rio makes the connection to the broker, it stays persistent. So we know state, and we can subscribe to any changes that might come back. So it requires no port forwards, no opening up of firewalls, none of that, and it's all secure. So in terms of, when you start thinking about how you got to put these systems together, if you go to your IT department, they're like, whoa, hey, we don't want any more devices on our network. You can say, these devices are DHCP'd. They're all outbound connections. We don't have any firewall ports open. The only port that's open on this guy is 443, so I can get to the web server. For Doug, he did open up another port, 8502, so that it would respond to Modbus requests. But the point is that you can really lock down these devices now, whether it's Rio, whether it's Epic, or some of the other edge devices that are coming on the market now. So we're really, I think the industry is doing a terrific job of addressing the question and the issues relative to security. So enough of that rant, but I think it's an important point. I wanted to make sure it was clear. Okay, anything else? Thank you for the great comments in the questions. We appreciate that. We enjoyed putting this on. It was great working with Doug and Grantek. Those guys are sharp. And of course, we love working with Inductive as we have for years. So Doug, if there's nothing else, then I think we're probably going to be close to ready to be signing off here.
That works for me. Jeff, do you have any closing remarks?
No, thank you everyone for joining us. And as Benson mentioned, if there were any questions about Ignition or Grantek, feel free to email us at info@grantek.com. Thank you for attending.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you on another ICL coming up soon.